Welcome back to The Explainer. So today, we're unpacking something pretty fascinating, the highly systematic and honestly rigorous science of test construction. We're going to look under the hood at the exact mechanisms experts use to build assessments that are reliable, fair, and actually mathematically proven to work. But before we get into the hard science, let's get a little personal for a second. Have you ever taken a test that just felt completely unfair? Maybe the questions were totally confusing, or it tested you on obscure things the teacher barely even mentioned. Or maybe the format just didn't let you show what you actually knew. We've all been there, right? And that universal frustration happens because someone assumed that simply writing down a bunch of questions is the exact same thing as true test construction. Well, spoiler alert, it's not. Actually, writing questions is just one tiny piece of a massive, deeply scientific process. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is how we're going to break it all down today. 1. Defining test construction. 2. Principles of test development. 3. Essential test elements. 4. The construction process. And 5. Administering and scoring. All right, Section 1, defining test construction. What exactly is testing? To really make this click, I want you to think about building a test, kind of like building a house. Let's lay down the ground rules and figure out what we're actually doing here. So, test construction is officially defined as the systematic process of designing, developing, validating, and administering an assessment instrument that accurately measures specified learning outcomes. And the absolute keyword right there is systematic. See, testing isn't just some quick mechanism for slapping grades on a transcript. It's a carefully planned developmental tool. When you test a student, you're gathering systematic evidence about their knowledge and skills so you can actually make informed decisions about their future learning. I absolutely love this quote from Arthur Hughes. He notes that a test is a formal procedure designed to elicit a sample of learners' behavior from which inferences about their language ability or educational achievement can be drawn. Just think about that for a second. You are setting up a scenario to deliberately pull a specific behavior out of a student just so you can make a fair, accurate inference about what is actually inside their head. That is a highly technical responsibility. Moving right along to Section 2, Principles of Test Development. Because if we're building a house, we definitely need a solid foundation, right? In testing, this foundation is made of core principles that prevent measurement errors and bias. And listen, if any of these foundational principles are missing, the structural integrity of your test completely falls apart. First up, validity. Does the test actually measure what it claims to? Like, if you're trying to test speaking skills using a written multiple-choice grammar test, yeah, that's invalid. Second is reliability. Is it consistent? If two different teachers grade the exact same essay, do they give it the same score? Third, practicality. Can you actually run this test in the real world without bankrupting your time or budget? Fourth, authenticity. Does it resemble real-life tasks? And finally, fairness. The sources give a fantastic example of a fairness failure. Imagine giving a reading comprehension passage about the complex rules of American football to international students. That tests regional knowledge, not reading ability. That is a massive structural measurement failure. Which brings us to Section 3, Essential Test Elements. Our foundation is poured, so let's look at the actual materials we use to construct the assessment. And this brilliantly illustrates the most important material of all, the test blueprint matrix. Think of this as your architectural master plan. Literally, before a single question is even written, developers create this grid. Notice how it takes content areas, like vocabulary, grammar, or reading, and maps them against targeted cognitive levels, things like remembering, applying, or analyzing. It also dictates proportional weighting. This makes sure that the topics heavily emphasized in class are actually given the most weight on the exam, because without this blueprint, you get what's called teacher bias. That's where a test heavily focuses on the topics the teacher personally just enjoys, while totally under-testing other critical concepts. Once you have that blueprint locked in, you select your building materials, the item types. Test developers have to carefully, deliberately match the format to the required cognitive processing level. Selected response items, like multiple choice or true-false, those are fantastic for efficiently assessing recall and application across a huge range of content. But if your blueprint calls for higher-order thinking, logical argumentation, or synthesis, you absolutely must use constructed response items, like essays or short answers. It's like I said earlier, you can't build a roof with floorboards, and you certainly can't test deep analytical reasoning with a simple true-false question. Let's move to Section 4 and see how this builds into the actual rigorous step-by-step construction phase. Constructing a professional test happens in 10 stages. First, needs analysis. Who exactly are we testing and why? Second, determining learning objectives. identifying the exact measurable skills we want to evaluate. Third, preparing that test blueprint we just talked about. Fourth, writing the test items. And here's a wild fact from the sources. Item writers actually generate 20 to 50% more items than they need because they know a bunch of them will fail the upcoming checks, which naturally leads to stage 5, expert review and moderation. This is where subject matter experts ruthlessly evaluate the draft items. They strip out deceptive phrasing or cultural biases, effectively ensuring absolute measurement accuracy before the test is ever even taken. The momentum keeps going right into stage 6, pilot testing. The draft test is given to a sample group of real learners under actual conditions to gather hard empirical data. This completely prevents artificial score inflation or unfair time crunches. Stage 7 is quantitative item analysis. Stage 8 is test revision and item banking. Basically, flawed items are thrown out, and the mathematically proven ones are saved to a database. Stage 9 is final standardized administration, where everything from the timing right down to the room noise is tightly uniform and controlled. And finally, Stage 10, scoring, interpretation, and continuous program review. Section 5, administering and scoring. I want to zoom in on Stage 7 really quickly to look at the exact mathematical science of evaluating test items. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is this specific formula. During that Stage 7 item analysis, psychometricians calculate what's called a discrimination index, or a d-value. It mathematically proves whether a single test question effectively separates the top students from the struggling students. Here's how it works. They take the top 27% of scores on the pilot test and the bottom 27%. If 85% of the top group gets a question right, but only 25% of the bottom group gets it right, your d-value is 0.60. That is excellent discrimination. It means the question works perfectly. But imagine if the top students overthink a poorly worded trick question and get it wrong, while the bottom students just blindly guess and get it right. You'd get a negative d-value. That instantly tells the test developers, hey, this question is broken. Throw it out immediately. So all of this systematic planning, blueprinting, and intense mathematical analysis leads to one final, absolutely crucial concept: washback. Washback is the influence that a test has on teaching and learning in the actual classroom. Negative washback happens when a poorly constructed test forces teachers to just drill rote memorization. But positive washback, that happens when a well-constructed, authentic test actually encourages meaningful, real-world learning. So I want to leave you with this provocative question to think about. Are the tests you take or the tests you give merely evaluating past learning, or are they actually developing future learning? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will catch you next time.